All right, now, without further ado, we will pass this along to Russell Anderson. So, Russell, tell us what have you been doing lately? Anything, any updates or anything?
Yeah, well, I just like when I presented the Alexei Chekhikov, my prototypes a couple years ago, they just sit there, no weight loss, nothing. But I have some new angles that I'm going to start examining when I get back to Florida, and it's a work in progress.
What do you think about that, man? I've been seeing the chats going back and forth in our group about that Alexei Cherkov stuff. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name.
Chekhikov.
Chekhikov.
Like Chekhov with a K-U-R in the middle.
Chekhikov.
Exactly.
Okay. So you think you built this device to his technical specifications, and it has no weight loss?
Well, I may not have. There's a dearth of information. He doesn't have any data on the exact sizes and proportions of everything, and that would be immeasurable in getting these things to run.
Right.
Well, they run, but getting the things to levitate and fly. We need more information, and there's a couple of factors, a couple of parameters that are missing. And one thing that I have found through all the research on that and suggestions from others is that it has to have all the input frequencies and everything, the power, ultrasonics, AC, DC, on-off duty cycle, have to be in resonance. When you get things, as you know, when you get things in resonance, harmonic resonance, some incredible things start happening.
Interesting.
The effect becomes additive, and it's just like music. And I'm of course a professional musician also. It's just like music when you're making a chord, or you say you have a guitar on one side of a big room, and you hit the note, and the other guitar open string is tuned to the exact same frequency. Irrespective of difference, that string will start vibrating on the other side of the room. So harmonic resonance does a lot of incredible things, as we've seen. And I believe, as do others, that harmonic resonance is the key to getting the Chekhikov device working. And Alexei, before he was able to get liftoff, would spend sometimes 30, 40 minutes adjusting parameters to get everything in resonance, not unlike John Hutchison.
Interesting.
So resonance is the key with that device, but that's the challenge, and that's probably the most challenging part of getting it to do its thing and rise up.
So, and then I also saw I saw two of those Chekhikov devices on your table downstairs, and you also had an SEG mock-up that you built.
Well, I didn't build it. That was built by one of our teammates who is no longer with the company, in San Diego back in 2006. And that's where I first saw it, at the actually Tom Vallone's, I believe it was the second or third Conference on Future Energy in Washington, D.C., actually Washington, D.C. area. And I was there for that. And
was that Jason Berbelli?
No. I first met Jason in the flesh. We had been friends since '05 online. But I first met Jason in 2010 when we were here in town in Albuquerque with Professor Searl and the new team they called the Dream Team back in July of 2010.
That's right. And you guys were at TeslaTech in 2010. And actually, Jason called me from the room, and I did an interview with Searl then, and I have a DVD of it, but the audio's like missing from it. I don't know,
that's the hallmark of alien scientists.
Oh no. But anyway, yeah, the whole idea is to build these things and fly them and then mass market them so that we can have some cash flow to do the Searl technology, which is of course now patented since January 16th of 2018. It's patent number 9871431B2 spintronic generator. No longer called the Searl effect generator, because Professor Searl copyrighted his name back in 2016 or 2015, something like that.
So it's called the spintronic effect.
And there are a lot of important new papers on the emerging science of spintronics, a new understanding of atomic and subatomic.
Resonances again.
Yes.
This key thing, resonance. Does resonance play an effect? You think in the fine tuning of the to get that other the SEG technology?
Well, Tesla, I'm sorry, Searl, absolutely, yes. Resonance is so important for getting these over unity and anti-gravity effects to show themselves. And in fact, I might add that anti-gravity propulsion is one noted aspect of actual working free energy devices. It's a byproduct of the operation. So we see in these UFOs like the Tic Tac and the gimbal and the other UFOs that they've been seeing off the East Coast and West Coast for years, almost every day sometimes, that they are able to go from 0 to thousands of miles per hour, or go from thousands of miles per hour to 0, or make right angle turns at those speeds. There's no sonic boom. There's no perturbation of the structure. But that can easily be explained by the nature of the propulsion system itself. Thomas Townsend Brown proved in Agnew A.H. Banson Labs in the late 1950s in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He says he achieved isolation, quote unquote. Well, isolation means that it is isolated from G-forces and inertia, which is really important, because if you have canceled inertial mass, the heavier you go, or heavier a body goes through space, it won't get, the faster it goes through space, it won't get heavier and heavier. You have no inertial mass. And Dr. Gabriel Lippmann, I'm not sure when, Nobel winner, discovered that when bodies are charged negatively, they have less inertia than if they're charged positively. And he called it the inertia of static electricity. And this is also dovetailed with Einstein's Einheitlichen theory, or the unified field theory for gravitation and electricity, which was published January 10th, 1929 in Annalen der Physik, which is a Prussian physics journal, science journal. And then it was published 2 days later, January 12th, 1929, in the New York Times with great fanfare. But for some reason, just like the fundamental works of Nikola Tesla and Nikola Tesla himself, it was erased from history, even though Dr. Parvis Murat of a university in Baltimore, I think it was the University of Baltimore, tested Einstein's unified field theory and said it passed with flying colors. And that was the year of Einstein's death, 1955. So we've got to look, not say, well, these devices are real, we know they're there, but they violate all known laws of physics. No, they don't. They obey all known laws of physics. And the isolation that Thomas Townsend Brown discovered when these electrified devices are allowed to go horizontally or vertically is part and parcel of that. We've got to learn and to think in different ways about propulsion. Instead of having a point of force coming, say, with the internal combustion, with rocketry, even an ion rocket or a nuclear rocket, you don't have a propulsion coming from any point on the device, and then the force going through the device atom by atom, transferring its force to the structure and then the payload. Instead, every atom of ship and payload within that force field moves at the same rate. At that point, you have effectively eliminated G-force and inertia, which is the exact same thing we see in the energized flight voltage Searl craft. You don't feel anything inside once it's powered up. The strongest stress is when it's on the ground and either the generator is not running, or it's not running fast enough or cold enough to achieve that dynamic countervary weight loss. So this is very, very important, but this is not widely known, and these facts need to be broadcast to the public and the scientific community far and wide, so we can have a new understanding of propulsion and more easily and quickly enter a new age, which we need to at this point with everything going on.
Yeah, I'm hoping that more people in this community that we've created, further the work and engage in this. And it's good to, be here at the conference with a lot of the guys who helped start a lot of this and pioneer it. And bring, new blood with the old. Mark, I'm gonna go downstairs and film that demonstration that's about to start up, and I'm gonna let you jump in here. I'll be right back.
Okay, so we go. So just to reset the room over here, we do have Lucian, what's your last name again? Ionesco with us here at TeslaTech, and Russell Anderson, who both presented. They gave presentations. I think it was yesterday.
I gave mine on Thursday, actually.
And you gave yours on Thursday, right?
And you did Thursday also.
There's also a couple other people in the back room over here. Tony Robertson, who comes by APEC almost regularly, stopped by just a minute ago. John Brandenburg is here. And of course, Steve Ellswick. Hats off to him for putting this event together. It's quite a job to put something like this together. And there was a couple other notable physicists and engineers, big names in this field that I've met throughout. So there's quite a concentration of very smart people. So what is it about TeslaTech that draws you in specifically?
Well, I have been a huge science fiction fan all my life. And I love how the science fiction is a great mind expander because it forces your imagination. It's like, Steven Spielberg said, it's like Pilates for the brain, for the mind. You are forced to, stretch your imagination. And if you can imagine it, you can find a way to do it. And I've always been a fan of space travel and going to other worlds. I remember seeing the premiere of Star Trek back in '66 when I was 5 years old, and just been thrilled to death, my whole family, and said, someday soon mankind is going to go out in space, and just for our own survival. But we're not going to go out as we are today in the 21st century. We're going to go out with a renewed and more a higher spirituality, so we won't repeat the mistakes of the past that led to horrible things like genocide and war. We are going to go with a new attitude, and that attitude is one of peace and love and acceptance, and that is so important for our continued survival even now. And we are going to do these things, but we're not going to do them as we are. We are going to have to, as Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet, said, show thyself approved first.
Oh, that was very beautiful. So what's next with the Searl device? I know I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Jason Verbelli was on APEC. I think it was about a month ago, and he said give him $3 million and he'll get it working. What do you think of that?
I don't think that they're going to be able to get working. First of all, $3 million is a little low. It is now $5 million because costs have risen. Every kind of cost has risen: materials, equipment, everything. And plus the fact that they had every chance to do it back 7, 8 years ago, and they did nothing. 1.2 million, actually 1.2 million dollars went into Searl Magnetics in San Diego, and all that came out were a couple of plug-in demos and a raggedy looking unacceptable pressed magnet. So I wouldn't look to San Diego for any kind of work on cogent, concise work on that, unfortunately, because I did work down there on a contract basis back in 2013 and 2014, and it was, it rapidly became a train wreck. But that's not to say that we are not on the ball in spintronics. We have the tables and the formulae and the knowledge to put it together in reasonable time and economy. We just need the funding, 5 million, and that's not a lot in venture capital. So we can do this. We just need interest. Part of my motivation for replicating Alexei's working devices is to generate cash flow through the sale of these working devices to whomever, and generate some cash flow so that we can do the Searl stuff that is patented and we want to do. And so we just have to I just have to keep working as hard as I can, which I've been doing. I live in Central Florida now, and working for a lab down there since last summer, and just working on this Chekhov device so I can get things going. Exactly.
But there's been other teams that have worked on the SEG as well. I know the Russians built a really large device.
Built a working device that replicates some of the effects, temperature drop, weight loss, and magnetic walls. And our
that device is pretty hefty, I heard.
It is hefty, it's large and heavy, a lot of inertia. But of course, the inertia gets less when the device is up to a certain speed. It loses a good point, maybe about 35–40% of its weight, which is highly significant. That's way more than Podkletnov even got.
Yeah. How do you think this compares with Alciphon, or does it compare at all?
No, Alciphon is a little bit different methodology, and I first remember reading about that in the early 90s. And I mentioned him in my DVDs that come with my anti-gravity kits, which are award-winning. Shameless commercial plug, but yeah, those are, I love those anti-gravity kits, the B-Field Brown electrokinetic apparatus kits, because they're mind expanders for everyone, especially this younger generation. It's so important and critical that we get the younger generation involved in these sciences and technologies, because they are our future, and they will be, I'm 60 years old, I'm an old man, we've got to get the young people in this, so we need the next generation.
Okay, actually, Jeremiah brought something up. I'm going to put it on the screen for a second. And this is something I actually agree with. Alexei Chekhov made it out of trash. So why do we need 5 million?
We don't need 5 million for the Chekhov device, for the Searl technology. And that doesn't just get one prototype, it gets several. You always want more than one prototype when you're doing the R&D stuff. It's very important.
My point of view, if I may, is that there is a lot of interest and effort in the experimental aspect of it, but we need to get the masses to understand the main points, which will make this endeavor much more feasible if everybody understands that gravity is not a fundamental force and it can be controlled, and there are various avenues to go about this. So one is Searl's effect, if you want, which involves the so-called etheric flow. The other one, which is in some sense more static, is Alciphon's approach to reorient the nuclei and affect the weight itself. So then a textbook, I would say, presenting this in lay terms, so with pictures, so everybody would understand, will create the support to fund these experimental efforts in various places. So we have to somehow fight against the idea that gravity cannot be controlled. So.
And also, I might add, gravity and time are intimately interconnected. The stronger a gravity source, the slower time will flow. That's called gravitational time dilation. So, not only will gravitational propulsion enable warp drive, it will also, under certain conditions, enable time travel, which is pretty cool. Although you have to know exactly what you're doing, or you'll come out into another dimension and never get back to the place where you started from. So I think right now we'll just stick with warp drive and interplanetary and interstellar travel. Oh, by the way, NASA's tested, the breakthrough propulsion has tested that a new microwave thruster system and it works. Basically, it's bouncing microwaves around in a progressively larger category, producing unidirectional thrust. Even though the thrust is very small, it's still a thrust, and it is an acceleration. So it can accelerate over, say, a few days and reach incredible speeds, way up to the speed of light, which Professor Searl said his device can do almost instantaneously or very, very rapidly. However, since the device has no inertia, it's not it's shielded from gravitational dilation, so you're traveling inside a bubble of normal space. Your ship time and earth time are going to be the same. However, since space, or the ether, is the most elastic medium known, with simple electromagnetics and high energy electrostatics, you can compress the space in front of you and expand it behind you to make a simple warp drive. And when you look at the shockwave pattern on a device that has exceeded the speed of sound, not only does it look the same, but the formulae, the mathematical formulae to make that happen, breaking the speed of sound and breaking the light barrier too, they're almost pretty much the exact same equation.
Another thing that's been brought up, and I mentioned this to you earlier, and many people on the chat have as well, that when you see a device like the Searl effect generator, which he claimed flew off, and broke a hole through the ceiling, and you see the device like the Alexei Chekhov gravity flyer, where it's just floating around in the field, going up 30 some odd feet, and you get these weird explanations in Russian. That maybe we're looking at a hoax. Like, what makes you so sure that the SEG is a real thing, or that the gravity flyer?
Well, they're not only where there was lots of documentation with the SEG and the IGV levity, they were called levity discs back in the day. We have media coverage from Southern Television and BBC One. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's U.S. patent number 9871431B2 spintronic generator, taken out in Professor Searl's name. So that's a huge, huge victory for the technology. Now we just have to get it funded and build it, and we have the requisite knowledge amongst our team to do exactly that. So there's no technological barrier or hurdle. All we need is just the funding, and we'll do the rest. 5 million.
What will this device actually do? Like, is it going to fly over Unity? Is it going to make me dinner? Like,
yeah. Well, the actual generator itself coheres the 0-point energy. It's a Maxwell's demon, so it obeys the technological world and the laws of what Thomas Bearden called an energy or anti-energy. Everything works in reverse. So in a conventional generator, the more load you put on it, the slower it runs and the hotter it gets. Well, the SEGs, they didn't do that. If they were just left on their own devices, and they could either be started by an external field or by hand, they instead, the more load you put on them, they got colder, and it seemed like the amount of power you could draw from them became greater and greater, and this became very, very high voltage, but only at 1.5 milliamps total current. So at some point when you're overloading these devices, around 4 Kelvin, the device, the generator, and anything attached to it loses all its inertia, and then the Earth's gravity field becomes a pushing mechanism that pushes things away from the Earth or any other mass. So when these levity discs or Searl effect craft or models, they're all radio controlled models. Some were throwaway models with no radio control. They're just up and out of sight and they're gone.
is there any video recording of Searl effect generator flying up NLA?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's tons of footage. Southern Television, BBC One, and back in the 90s, we were looking to get some of that footage from BBC One, and they wanted all kinds of insane money for it, tens of thousands of dollars. And then a few years later, several years later, in the early 2000s, they wouldn't even admit that that existed. which insult a lot of people. Like, oh gosh, I remember one Facebook friend, William Stillings, who remembers seeing those videos. And I'm sure there are a lot of others, because that was not too long ago. If you're, at least age 10, I was age 10 in 1971. That was when a lot of the work was being done, and it was all the flight tests. Most of the flight tests were done in Warminster. Well, coincidentally, Warminster became the UFO capital of Europe. And that was all due to the activities of the Searl National Space Research Consortium.
Well, when did he have a device that purportedly flew through the roof?
That was in the late 1940s, Crawley Road in London. At that time, Professor Searl, well, he was a professor then, but John Roy Robert Searl was a teenager, and he was working as an electrical fitter apprentice at British Rewinds and Repairs Company. And they had all the infrastructure there to make these things. They had multi-ton, 200-ton magnet presses. They had magnetizing coils. They had all the equipment, tools and equipment he needed to build these things. All he had to do was just supply the raw materials, the chemical elements that make up was basically a permanent battery. You're causing electron flow in one direction. And that polarity of that battery is positive at the center and negative at the rim, just like a Faraday unipolar dynamo, which is that famous spinning copper disc. So I highly recommend you get the book or read the book, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion by La Violette, who I first saw in 1990 in Colorado Springs, because he has chapter 10 is completely devoted to the SEG.
I'm gonna press you a little hard to hear. Sorry if I go a little too tough on you, but teenage Searl didn't have $5 million or even the equivalent at his disposal. How is he able to do it?
Well, because at that time, the chemical elements were, and the constituent elements were a lot less expensive than they are now. For instance, neodymium, the rare earth that's necessary as the electron collector and source in the device, was only. No. It's prohibitively expensive and not cost efficient to try and magnetize neodymium. You're only magnetizing the iron. And they back in the day, they're all homogeneous magnets. The layered versions that you've seen online in the various presentations were proposed theoretical model, which ostensibly would work even better than the homogeneous magnets.
Okay, so we're talking about non-magnetized neodymium that's.
Yes, the neodymium would be known as the collector. And what's happening in that device is that neodymium is drawn, an electron from the environment is drawn into the center of the device, and that joins with a free electron from the outer 4F or 5F band shell of the neodymium. Great thing about elements like neodymium in the lanthanide series is that they have a couple extra free electrons in their outer 4F and 5F band shells. Well, the electron is the most mobile part of the atom, and it can easily be stripped or added to via high voltage ionization. So we can see that this device, when also, I neglected to mention yesterday, when the power output gets over 500,000 to 1,000,000 volts, no air can come near it. From the rim, it's just pushed away by the negative charges coming off the rim. And what's happening is those charges, one electron from an atom of neodymium and one electron from the environment, and of course the ether you could think of as pre-electrons, they form a Cooper pair or boson pair. It becomes boson currents. Well, fermion current is your normal electric current in our walls and cars and power systems. That would be fermion current. That's the electrons just bouncing around, producing a lot of kinetic energy, which means heat. Well, the opposite thing happens with the Searl technology. You have boson current and Cooper pairs, which actually cool the generator and cool other objects. And that's very important because that coolness is amplified and the device gets much faster and runs colder as more load is put on it. And while it's doing that, coincidentally, it's getting lighter. And also a partial vacuum is forming around the device, a vacuum envelope. And then at a certain power level also, you see a pink halo around it when it rises up and it's still speeding up, getting ready to take off for parts unknown. That pink halo is pink instead of blue because of the reduced atmospheric pressure around the device. So that's important when you are measuring things. You want to look for temperature drop and you want to look for reduced atmospheric pressure around the device. What's also really important about the device, and they tested this at the University of Sussex, along with several other demonstrations in the early 70s, is that if a sample of a radioactive element is placed inside the center ring, it will, in a very short time, minutes, no longer be emitting ionizing radiation, where it may have been emitting ionizing radiation for years or decades or even centuries. It is no longer radioactive anymore. Think of what a fleet of Searl effect craft would do over radioactive sites where they have spills and stuff.
I mean, if it's getting cold and producing power, wouldn't you think that's just a thermoelectric generator? Not to diminish a direct thermoelectric generator will solve the world's energy problem. But is that essentially what it is? And when it reaches absolute zero, it powers down?
Well, 4 Kelvin, that's when the weird things start to happen. But temperature drop is what gets everything going. Really, even before everything gets down to 4 Kelvin, you could think of it as a superconductor. So it's definitely superconducting, and the magnetic pattern of the fields on the plates and runners is the same, but it's not conventional. It's not your conventional bow tie pattern.
And how did Searl measure 4 Kelvin? And what was he doing about ice buildup?
Well, there was no ice buildup. Coincidentally, there was also no flashover or discharge. I'm guessing it's because of the nature of the boson current. It didn't allow for arcing and flashover.
Okay, but wouldn't air get in there and condense and become ice?
No, because remember, above 500, anything above 500,000 to 1,000,000 volts on that system, which is way below the levitating voltage, which is something like 10 to the 12 volts at 1.5 milliamps. No air can come near the device. It's just pushed away from the rim by the negative field, the negative ions coming off the generator. By the way, you could also think of the generator as a negative ion generator on steroids. When it's in your house, is producing so many negative ions that it just kills germs, microbes, even dirt just falls right to the floor. It's very, very healthy. In fact, Gordon Goodfellow, who became a team member, Professor Searl, he was dying of a lung ailment. Professor Searl gave him a generator to just run in his home. After less than 24 hours, or maybe it was 48 hours, his lung ailment had disappeared pretty much, and he felt so much better. Where he would have died, he lived, and at that point asked to join the team. And you can see him in some videos or still pictures and videos working on the Demo 1 model in 1972. That's when I was 11. And that's pretty significant because you have health effects as well as anomalous power coherence from the 0 points and anti-gravity. Powerful anti-gravity, because the generators are very, very heavy.
Yeah, well,
Magnets are very heavy.
yeah, I think I saw a picture once of the one that was made by the Russians, and it was pretty sizable, probably over a ton in weight. It was a really large device. What do you think the impediment to funding this type of technology? Why isn't anyone getting the funds together to take another bite at the apple?
Funding, we actually have gotten funding in dribs and drabs, but not the final amount that we need. That's in our prospectus, in our budget to get things going. But if we ever needed funding, it's now. We have to do this, and the money doesn't last forever. It dries up, but we need investors with vision who know this technology and similar tangential technologies and want to see a team actually do this and get a sizable, substantial return on their investment in reasonable time.
We we've spoken with many people here at APEC, and both in person or read their stories of people who've been abducted or been on board spacecraft. And we're privy to the technology. This is an angle that some people at APEC have looked at to try to figure out what's going on. Has anyone ever been on a spacecraft where a Searl-like generator was in operation?
Oh, yes. There's a gentleman in Canada who basically built a device called the poor man's Searl disk, and that would be David Hamill. And he built a similar device that was based on pretty much conventional magnets, these granite balls and pinions, and conventional aluminum, aircraft aluminum. And he built a working flying saucer. And when it was set in motion on his rooftop or rooftop patio, it was changing colors. First a deep red, then orange, then yellow, then finally white, and then it just took off. At that point, very similar to Searl's methodology, the whole neighborhood was blacked out. Now, when Searl's devices are operating and superconducting at the flight voltage, which is some 10 to the 12 volts at 1.5 milliamps, it blanks out ground to air transmission if you're near an airport, or your radio in a car. And in fact, if you're in a residential area, Professor Searl said radio receivers and TV receivers went on of their own accord, even when they're not plugged in, just at full volume, which made him very popular with his neighbors. So I'm not sure. That hasn't really been discussed. The only thing that we can come up with is that when we have them at a facility, it's got to be at least 2 miles away from any highway or airport or homes.
Wouldn't that be a major impediment to using this in an actual craft?
No, because most of these airports, like the Space Center right here, or what do you call it? The Spaceport. Thank you. Here in New Mexico is also similarly not near residential facilities or commercial facilities. It's seemingly, off the beaten path, just like the Very Large Array, the Carl Jansky Very Large Array here in Socorro, which I visited back in 2017. That has to be isolated from signal and vibration to be effective. But we have a similar case here where in order not to interfere with daily life, we have it a couple miles away. We could have it at an airport, I'm thinking, but it would really have to be isolated a couple miles away from everything.
So there's no lead shielding or Faraday cage or anything that will shield from.
Not that we're aware of.
Yeah.
It goes right through.
Now, that's something we've seen with flying saucers. We've seen that there are electromagnetic effects that can't be Faraday shielded.
Just like gravity. Gravity can't be Faraday shielded. And that's what Nieper found out when he did his experiments with lead balls suspended by wires that were charged. The force went right through the gravity force went right through the Faraday cages. So it's not pure electrostatics. There's obviously a gravitational component in there, and that is not widely known. And those experiments were done in the 19-teens or like 1913, 14.
How would you differentiate between some exotic electric effect and a gravitational effect?
They're pretty much one and the same thing.
Fair enough. Okay.
I stressed that in some other lectures, that a high energy electrostatic field and a gravitational force are exactly one and the same thing.
What frequencies are we talking about
We're
then?
talking about a very, very high frequency just above the infrared and below the radar. So that's why gravity is the most penetrating radiation known. Go through miles of lead shielding.
I think that was backwards. I think below infrared and above radar.
Yeah, I think I reversed that, but yeah, that's exactly right.
That's where the terahertz band, the gap is.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's about 10 to the 13 hertz.
Right. And that sample that Linda Moulton Howe had, that was a terahertz waveguide that was right in the low terahertz. It's like between 1 and 10, I think, is the point.
That makes sense. At that point, you're producing gravity-inducing radiations. That's very important. Highly recommend the book Anti-Gravity and the World Grid by Childress, David Hatcher Childress, that I first read in 1987. And in the back of it, it had some stills from that those 6 stills shot in rapid succession of a P-11 craft. It's called the P-11, 10-foot diameter craft, which weighed about 4.5 tons, flying over that field in Warminster.
Wow, no, that's really cool.
When energized, those craft, when they're flying, they can't crash into anything. They can't crash into buildings. They can't crash into the ground. As soon as they got near the ground, the field would just push, the Earth's field combined with the generator's field would just push it away and would go back up, arc back up. So they used to rush models at the house, and as soon as it got near, it would just be pushed away. That's electrostatic repulsion.
Yeah, we're familiar with that in the lab, but I have never seen it do much more than a couple grams of repulsion. But again, we're only going up to 100
Don't forget
kilovolts.
the intensity of the charge, and with this one propulsion, the force is exponential with increasing voltage. So think of the insane voltages that are coming off that rim. I mean, just unbelievable voltage, but yet there's no arcing or flashover. Just a little bit of electrical crackling, and leaves and other loose objects on the ground would start moving around in little vortices around the device. That's kind of important too.
Is there any videos of the Searl device actually working and levitating?
Well, the closest thing we have now are film strips in the book Law of the Squares books from John Thomas, and I bought a couple of those back in the day, and they're basically stills that you can shoot and animate, and you can see, just like Thursday in my presentation, you can see the action of the flight cells opening and closing, changing the attitude of the craft to maintain a stable hover.
So why do you think it is that Searl gets such a bad rap? But especially amongst the people who are just getting into this, like seeing it as a fraud. And I've seen the similar stuff with the Gravity Flyer as well, and try to keep an open mind. And Tim Ventura, I've mentioned a couple times how he would look at something and say, "Oh, that's impossible," and a week later he finds out, no, it is possible. So impossible is a dangerous word, but people throw it around at Searl, and they throw it at Alexei Churykov's Gravity Flyer. And why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, it's I think it's the inertia of entrenched stupidity. Back
That's a word I'm going to go with.
Yeah, back in the day, back in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, I was working another job, basically copying software and sending it to radio stations. And I was working with people, and I'd say, well, I'm interested in this. And they said, well, if this stuff was real, we'd have seen it long ago. We'd have seen it in our society. I took the opposite viewpoint. I said, well, it's been covered up. It's been deliberately suppressed and covered up. Turns out I was right.
What kind of evidence is there for cover up?
Oh gosh, all over. Just the way Professor Searl was treated, the way Thomas Townsend Brown was treated. A friend of mine, colleague, Larry Davenport, who's done a lot of significant anti-gravity work since the 80s and 90s, he said that he first learned about the Biefeld-Brown effect in school, in elementary school in the 1950s. And somewhere around late 55, early 56, it disappeared from the schools. And nobody could give me a straight answer why, or Larry a straight answer why that was. So they actually did teach it in school, and it was in the media. T. Townsend Brown had an office in Hollywood, California, in the early 1950s at one point. But then you see, the so-called disclosure in dribs and drabs. They say, well, these objects are obviously real, but we don't know how they fly. They break the laws of physics. Again, they're not breaking any known physical laws. They're totally coherent with all physical laws, as is Professor Searl's device. But when you get into high energy electrostatics, you see some strange effects. Just as when you get down to the micro nano level below submicroscopic, the strong nuclear force comes into play. Those protons in the center nucleus of an atom normally want to fly apart at the speed of light at that close distance. Instead, when you get to that close atomic distance, they're like glued together by a really powerful force. That's the strong nuclear force. That's the strongest force in nature. The only force second to that would be electrostatics. And electrostatics is central to the levitation of the Brown devices and the Searl devices and other devices, Alexi's device, Otis T. Carr's device. You can see it over and over again, this high energy electrostatics and either static fields, but more often rotating fields and vortices. It's very important. Nested fields, torsion fields, which of course are rotating fields, and counter rotating fields.
Okay, and with the Searl device, we have a lot of rotation going on there. We got the little.
Three concentric rings or plates and 69 to 72 concentric sets of runners. And the inner plate always has to have at least 12 runners to generate power.
Okay. Is there any specific reason why it needs 12?
I think it's because 12 is an important number in electrical engineering. It's an important number in nature. Basically 12 phases. You have to have those 12 phases to generate power smoothly. And that's one explanation. There are probably others that I'm not aware of.
I also heard that you have to have an odd number for it to work. Or
No.
that's wrong.
No. The whole reason these things work, it came from two oddly recurring dreams that happened to Professor Searl when he was a young boy from age 4.5 to age 10. And those two dreams repeated twice a year. And they were always the same dream. And the first dream, dream one, was based on the childhood game of hopscotch, where you have 8 squares. And that's very important to understanding the technology, which is called the law of the squares in its most basic form. And that mathematical system of basically magic squares is a mathematical representation of the complex switching and exchange patterns, which are very precise between matter and energy.
Oh, that's really interesting. We took a really deep dive here on the Searl electric generator. I don't think what's his name, Jason Verbelli, even got in that depth of detail of what was necessary to put this thing together. Thank you very much for that. Let's open up the panel for questions. If anyone has any questions. Tim, are you there?
Just an FYI, Tim handed over admin rights to Jeremy. So Jeremy's computer is now, I guess, the admin computer. So go to that one for controls.
Okay, I'm actually on Jeremy's computer. I have to go to the Zoom meeting. Okay, 1 second. I guess if anyone has any questions. 1 second.
I would like to ask a question. Yeah, is there any kind of large documentation database or a list of proofs, scans, files, videos, logs, anywhere on anyone's computer involved in this whole $5 million ask to say support the idea that there's something behind all of this, that it's not just, say, fairy tales, anecdotal evidence, and old stories that claimably can't be retrieved because of monetary restrictions? Is there something that's tangible to show the world that makes this worth $5 million?
Oh gosh, yes. We have
the
the budgets. We worked out the budgets for today's equipment, of course, and the raw materials. Of course, the cost of the raw materials have gone up exponentially since 1946.
I'm not asking you what it costs to do it. I'm asking you to show something that would prove to the world that what you're asking for is actually more than anecdote. I'd like to see some actual proofs here. Do you have any?
Yes, there are proofs. Our Vice President, Bradley Lockerman, has all kinds of films and files. Of course, he lived with Professor Searl for a long time. But yeah, and of course, in my presentations, I include that film clip of the six photographs taken in rapid succession showing the action of the flight cells and a P-11, a 10-foot, 4.5-ton P-11 flying over Warminster.
So basically, we're basing this $5 million ask on a series of 6 old photos in low resolution and low quality. That's the basis and the entire fundamental scientific proof behind asking for a huge sum of money. Is that right?
It's not actually a huge sum of money when we're talking to venture capitalists. Usually they deal in hundreds of millions of dollars, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're only asking for a paltry 5 million. So Yeah, no, we also have independent replications by Paul Brown, and we have incorrect replications by a Russian team, Roshan and Godin, and that is written up in either Nature or Technical Physics Letters, I believe. And we have independent confirmation of some of these effects.
You lead with that foot first, because if you bring those pieces of information forward, and by the way, if you're using external references and those people aren't on your team, I would say they deserve that funding because they already have a proof they did it. But if you're using other people's proofs and you have nothing personally, or your team has nothing personally, I'd say you're asking for an awfully large amount for what you're considering to be a trivial amount of capital with nothing to show for it. And I'm
Well,
sorry,
we have
out.
the knowledge, and the skills base
But show it.
directly from Professor Searl, because we all work with Professor Searl. These others did not. And therefore, he has shared his secrets with us. We have the patent since 2018, January 16, 2018. And it's not just anecdotal. Don't forget, we have lots of footage shot by Southern Television and BBC One. They had monthly, first Sunday of every month, flight demonstrations. Hundreds of people came and showed up and would write their name in a book as witnesses to this. And we have people that were in Searl's old neighborhoods in the country. They observed these things flying, and they called them electrified butterfly nets because that's what they looked like in flight. And because of the activities of the Searl National Space Research Consortium in Warminster, where most of the flights took place, it became the UFO capital of Europe. And that P-11 model was also stored in Archangel, Russia, because there was no place to house it for safety in the UK. Electrets, Ron Kita's expertise are very important in free energy devices. An electret is the electrical equivalent of a permanent magnet. Electrets are very, very important in these Searl devices. We have an insulator, which is either nylon 66, which is one of the first polymers. It's nylon 66 with a nylon with a negative charge, basically. Or today we could use Teflon, because that is also in the triboelectric series negative charge. We want to have elements in there also with a 6-sided crystalline structure, and then also foster a negative charge like sulfur, silicon, neodymium, iron. They're in a 6-element STG, use elements which foster a negative charge for fantastic power for flight. Don't forget, when these so-called generators are overloaded, they do the opposite of conventional generators. So they're obeying Thomas Bearden's principle of energy perfectly, where things are operating in reverse. Instead of having a device that's running and you're drawing power off it, and then it's when you put a load on it, it slows down and heats up. The Searl devices do the opposite. They speed up and get colder. Concurrently, while they're doing that, they're also getting lighter. At 4 Kelvin, the generator and anything attached to it loses all inertia, and the Earth's field pushes it away with irresistible force. Don't forget, what's coming off the rim of the device is negative charge of a very, very high voltage. Well, the Earth's surface has a negative charge of similarly extreme high voltage. We don't feel that high voltage because of the bird on a wire phenomenon. We're immersed in that electrogravitational field. So basically, there's a repulsion zone at the rim and an attraction zone at the hub. Sometimes when the drive was switched on suddenly, the device, flying devices, the levity discs as they were known back then, would take up a perfectly round chunk of sod that would stick to the bottom center of the craft. So it's obeying conventional electrodynamics and conventional electrostatics, just extreme high energy. And despite their great weights, when they're energized, not only is there no sonic boom, and we've seen that in these devices before, and Northrop Corporation with electrified airfoils found out that sonic boom and skin heating can be eliminated, but inertia can be eliminated as well, inertia and G-forces. And Leonard G. Cramp stresses that in his elucidation of electrogravitic craft and their observed effects.
Very nice. Thank you for that. Lucian, what do you think of the Searl effect generator and the Alexei Chekhov gravity flyer devices?
I would rather refer to those as being the, let's say, the initial way to attack gravity and anti-gravity, but I would rely more on the new methodology based on dynamical nuclear orientation, which does not go into those environmental problems. And if we look at the experiment of Alzophon, requires, let's say, $5,000 instead of 5 million. So, as I said earlier, Searl effect uses at its core the etheric flow or the vector potential. On the other hand, the Alzophon's approach goes directly to the cooling of the gravitational potential. So it's those two are somehow complementary. And again, I don't want to say one it's much better than the other one, but it looks like this nuclear orientation is a more friendly and easier to achieve than the initial historical Earth effect, which probably it's much better to be used for purposes of energy generation than anti-gravity itself. So, but I don't want to somehow go against or minimize Russell's direction. Or so both are interesting, and again, we should try to understand better both at a theoretical level, because then we would convince easier people to invest. And we had precisely that kind of question. What's the proof? Well, if we have a better theory for that, for people to understand, then it would be easier to convince and have the investors bring the money.
Also, there's confirmation in the last 7-8 years from the academic world of the field of spintronics. Now, spintronics is basically how that Searl device is going to be working. And it's been said that spintronics is going to be as much a revolution in electronics as was solid state electronics in the 1950s and early 60s, that spintronics is this newly recognized field that is now documented, and there's several fundamental papers on spintronics. And they basically exhibit all the effects that we've seen with the Searl technologies since 1946 in England.
So, and on that note too, spintronics is there's also a lot of stuff happening in topological insulators right now as well, and understanding, how electricity actually flows within the materials on the quantum level. That is like a key part of, I think, this whole understanding of that point at which the microscopic or atomic quark world, meets the physical world, submicroscopic or the subquantum, right at that quantum limit.
I highly recommend the book by Paul A. Laviolette, who I first saw in 1990 in Colorado Springs, his subquantum kinetics book. It talks about Model G, and Model G is a better explanation of gravity than many others that I've seen. Model G in subquantum kinetics predicts accurately what's happening with the T.T. Brown energized devices for warp drive and also the Searl effect devices. This high energy electrostatics is key to cohering the vacuum energy for incredible powerful propulsion. No sonic boom, no skin heating, no increase in inertial mass. Both the Brown devices and Searl devices obey similar principles. Someone on board or objects accelerometers on board the devices, when they're operating and the generators are supplying voltage, there is no inertia, there is no g-force being measured. Right angle turns at thousands of miles per hour are no problem. Again, perfectly in accord with known physical principles. They do not violate the laws of physics. The Searl effect devices do not violate the laws of physics either. What is happening is just a deeper understanding of physics. And as we've seen with subquantum kinetics by Paul A. Laviolette and the spintronics, new spintronics academia papers, they're indicating a deeper understanding of physics. It's not our 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s understanding of physics. It's a modern day 21st century understanding of physics that will allow both the coherence of free energy from the 0 point or the ether and powerful heavy lift artificial gravity for flight and warp drive.
So I agree. I like this. I like this a lot. I think I have a lot of questions about this whole, world of, subquantum kinetics. I didn't,
Keep those questions coming.
the standard models is so hard to break and show like that where it's flawed and stuff. So it's important that we stick with real physics and we don't try to reinvent physics or throw out all of physics, that we're using, legit physics.
Unfortunately, a lot of conventional physics is going to have to be altered. And, with all this new understanding, for instance, I saw a few papers last year and the year before that says sound waves have negative mass. Therefore, sound waves are anti-gravitational. And that's very important too, especially when you look at things like the NASA sonic levitation patents and the German experiments where they're levitating heavy rocks with sound waves, both audible and ultrasonic. And this goes right into the Tibetan stone levitation, which is really, really important. They're showing that the ancient monks or the modern monks knew something about the nucleons, how to influence with sonic vibrations, the nucleons at the center of the atom, so they no longer see gravity.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think that it might, like the mechanical resonances and vibrations might have something to do with, how these craft operate, because they're often seen, vibrating or off. There's frequencies and noises associated with them as well that they put off.
They're totally silent to us humans, but animals, when they're around, animals go nuts. Look at animal reaction to UFOs.
Frequencies above the audible range for humans.
They don't have to be audible frequencies. And there's also a blend of frequencies, and those frequencies seem to be based off of the Schumann resonance, which is about 8 hertz now.
There's also some coupling that happens too between sound and light too, with sonoluminescence.
Oh yes, and that leads to a very important thing. I'm a firm believer. I hate to use the term belief because that's more like for religion, but I have been studying the Billy Meyer case, UFO contact case, which is still ongoing since 1983, early 83. And Semyasi, the female cosmonaut, talking about propulsion system, and she doesn't, elucidate on a lot of this. She says we have to, come up with this on our own. If we're shown everything, we're never going to be developing stuff because, we're just being shown it. We have to come up with it on our own, just as they did. She said, quote, our ships are sound powered and light activated.
That's interesting. Sound powered and light activated.
Yeah, and you can see that again and again in the various anti-gravitational technologies. Everything from sonoluminescence to sonic levitation of very, very heavy objects.
That's super interesting, man. Thank you for this discussion. Are we who am I sitting with now? And Michael Smith, I'm with from. You're obviously one of the Kepler space guys. I met you earlier and had breakfast with you, but it's nice of you to join us now. Are we going to shift gears here and have less nuts and bolts, conversation of, the physics, and more of a conversation on this is intellectual property is your expertise. Yeah. Yeah.
We're not obviously not building a novel toaster over here. We're talking about reinventing the wheel of Ezekiel's Merkava. We're literally reinventing the wheel over here. And wow. So it was very much inspired by the Bible. So this stuff was with us since ancient times. And the idea of patents and the idea of intellectual property and credit, all these things are up in the air when you're discussing something like this. And I know there's a legal there's a legal route, there's an ethical route, and there's what makes sense.